Thank you everyone for joining us this morning. I'm very excited to be here amongst the DevOps community in Sydney. We had one early in the year in Melbourne, which was great. It was actually the first time I'd seen real people for a long time. I know you're not very sympathetic to us Melburnians, but we were in lockdown for like, I don't know, 4,000 days. So I think we set a record there. It was so good to see people again. And again, now that we're here in Sydney, it's great to see so many familiar faces and see more of my fellow DevOps colleagues and peers in the community as well. So today I'll be talking to you about monitoring to observability, how that fits into DevOps. Now you may see on a lot of the photos and stuff, apologies if you see my, I think on all the marketing material, I still got my ISO project on my face. So I look a bit different to how you'd see me. So I'm surprised anyone's actually recognized me. As I walked in, someone was like, Koray, I'm like, oh, you got it, well done. I look completely different to how I look in the picture. So this is kind of how I look now, obviously. A bit about me, I'm a big foodie. I'm a big techie, a big nerd. I love to play video games. I love to go for a run every morning. I like jazz. I'm your classical Melbourne hipster, big coffee snob. You name it, I tick all the boxes. Again, so we're going to go over some DevOps KPIs, what observability is, and how this links to both digital business and the DevOps loop. So now, everyone's going to be familiar, no stranger to how we've changed in development methodologies over time, right? So we started off with Waterfall. It's just how we developed applications for the longest period of time. You lock in those requirements. Even if your project takes 3 years to build out, you've committed to it, you can't change. Even though everything around you has changed, priorities have changed, requirements have changed. What your customer wants have changed, too bad. You've locked in and you've committed to building out this application. So then we saw this shift to Agile, right? Now we can get the concept of an MVP, minimum viable product. What can we do to start capitalizing on software quickly, right? Let's actually start generating some revenue on our efforts before the end of the 3-year period, for example. And then also, how do we adapt to changing requirements, right? So we introduced the concept of sprints into smaller production cycles, and then we can continually iterate. As things change around us, we can actually adapt to that, put it into the backlog, and then continue to be reactive and also relevant. Now, with this shift to Agile, we also saw a shift in how we do development and operations. You're going to be familiar with, again, you develop something, you hand it over to the ops team, they have no idea how it was developed, then they're responsible for maintaining it. You kind of throw it over the fence, that whole concept. And then this gave way to this concept of especially being agile. How can we be better at this, right? How can we continually learn? And that's where we saw DevOps come into play. And this is really where we can continually, we both become responsible for building and then maintaining the code. So we've got that ownership end to end. But also now we're constantly learning, right? So we've got visibility of both ends of the spectrum, and we know this is how it is to operate, so then we can feed that back into the next development cycle, and we're constantly learning and improving and hopefully continually optimizing. Now, what's important here is typically when we think about observability, and you see there one of these stages of the DevOps loop there is monitoring, but importantly, really observability fits into all facets of this, right? When we're thinking about our plan, configuration, packaging, whatever it may be, there's lots of important information we can collect across all parts of this loop. Right? So we should be getting feedback, monitoring, measuring all areas of this, and not just a deploy and then see how it looks. Right? We should be really factoring it into from the get-go. The whole shift left concept where we want to start improving right from the first stages of development. Now, really, DevOps has become the standard. So I don't know many development teams working in a waterfall style anymore. No, at least no one's advertising it. They're keeping that one well under the radar. So everyone's pushed to DevOps, and that's kind of what we're seeing now with observability as well, right? And I'll explain what that is, or at least how I see observability in a moment. But there's been a lot of tensions that have come up as a result of this shift, and that's mostly because of this big focus on how much can we push out as quick as possible, right? How many features, functions can we get? And let's prioritize that speed of innovation rather than what's the quality and how measurable is what we're pushing out. In terms of closing the gap, we should actually be spending almost just as much time making sure that what we're building is measurable as we are building out the software in the first place. And it sounds like a lot, but that time that you invest front up will pay dividends later down the track. And again, it's this concept of shift left, right? So the sooner we can catch a problem, or the further along an issue makes it in front of the customer, the more costly it becomes, the more reputational damage it causes, and the harder it is to rectify. Now, there's a few KPIs. I mean, there's thousands of KPIs, but there's a few key KPIs that are used to measure the effectiveness of DevOps within organizations. So a few key ones here, things like deployment frequency, how often are they failing, what's our feature release rate, MTTX, so what's our mean time to discovery and recovery. Then we've got mean lead time, so how long does it take to go from an idea to actually implementing it in production. Uptime, defect escape rate, so how often are we missing problems in QA and that are actually making it to production as well, and general application performance. And this is really where observability comes in, is how do we first measure any of these KPIs, let alone then start to improve them, right? And then link what we're doing into actual quantified, legitimate, evidence-based decision-making to say, yes, this is improving these areas. So, as I said, I'm a foodie. And my analogies are all food-based, and this spares no exception. So the way I like to explain observability is, let's say we take this pizza oven, right? And it's a black box, and we tell the customer, your pizza is going to be ready in 10 minutes. So they rock up in 10 minutes, they've paid. And then what we can do is, once the pizza comes out the back of it, it's burnt, it's charcoal, it's burnt to a crisp, it's inedible. Now, from an SLA perspective, that's now gone, right? We've got to start again. We can't give them a burnt pizza. So SLA's breached. We said 10 minutes. We're starting again. We've monitored that it's burnt, but we have no idea why. What went wrong? We've got no clue. So all we can do is try again and hope for the best. So we don't really have a repeatable or knowledgeable operation at the moment. So what we want to do is we want to make the monitoring that we're doing. We can sit there and stare at that pizza oven all day long and get no more information. And really, this is where observability comes in. Let's make our efforts in monitoring much more contextualized, much more informational. So let's add maybe a temperature gauge, a timer, a window would help potentially. But importantly, then we start this concept of unknown unknowns, I know confuses a lot of people as well. And imagine this pizza oven has multiple burners in there. Maybe we put a pizza in and we notice one of the 5 burners starts burning hotter than the others. We didn't even know that could happen, right? Like, I thought they all combined. So now we can be very proactive and say, let's adjust this one burner, bring that back into check, and we can actually prevent that pizza from burning in the first place. So now we can see things we didn't even anticipate and be very proactive in fixing them. So now we've got a very repeatable process and something that we can control and guarantee a great user experience. So that's my pizza oven analogy in a nutshell. You probably, and I've already spoken to people over the last day and a half around observability, and I've probably said Ollie a number of times. So O11Y, look, we're very lazy in tech. We're very lazy. So what we'll do is we'll basically get the first letter, the last letter, we count how many letters we want to skip, and then you have it, O11Y or Ollie. Now that is a numeronym. Say that 10 times fast without hurting yourself. It's also the same reason why you'll see Kubernetes as K8S. A little fun fact. We're very lazy, and I'm not kidding. We're very lazy. So this started off as a meme for April Fool's joke for Stack Overflow, and then actually the community is like, hey, I like this idea. You can legitimately go out and buy one of these copy-paste keyboards. They're available for sale. You're welcome. You're welcome. Now, on observability, there's a few key objectives that we look to address. And I know there's a lot on here. The slides will be available after the preso, so you can go and have a bit of a deeper read. But ultimately, it comes down to being able to address and improve customer experience, optimizing our costs, especially as we move to the cloud. How many times have you heard cost optimization, right? Accelerating development and innovation within our development culture, within our organizations. And then the classic ones, which is reducing unplanned work, minimizing outages, service impacts, those sorts of things. Typically, everyone is on some sort of modernization journey. That journey is going to look a bit different for everybody. For some, it's moving to cloud, whether that's even just a lift and shift and keeping it as it is, letting cloud host some of those instances, maybe moving to a bit of PaaS, letting our cloud providers take over some of the databases and load balancers within our application, or going complete re-architect, going microservices. Again, that could be maybe OpenShift on-premise, shout out to Red Hat, or we're using something in the cloud as well. But typically, unless you're starting today, you're not going to be in one. So what we see is generally you're going to be across all all of these boundaries typically, right? So we think about a bank, mainframes, they're not going to go anywhere. Sorry to everyone working in the banks. They're not going to go anywhere. Then you had a project, 5 years ago that introduced a bit of OpenShift on-premise. The most recent project is all cloud native, mobile application, serverless functions, microservices. That world of microservices is already complex enough as it is, but then you've got workflows that go across all these boundaries that only adds to the complexity, right? Now we've got a lot of different things, a lot of different technologies, a lot of different flavors to consider and trying to normalize. When we're trying to compare apples and apples, we've got a whole fruit bowl here to worry about. And then when it comes to innovation complexity, all right, as we start to play with these new toys, we see innovation go through the roof. Look at all these cool toys, bells and whistles, all these cool things we can do. But then very quickly, we bite off more than we can chew, and then we spend more time fighting the fires that we've introduced, and then innovation takes a big hit, and we actually start to go a bit backwards and focus more on trying to wrangle this Frankenstein monster that we've built. So it's important that we do, whilst we do want to innovate constantly, which means taking on more bells and whistles, we've just got to make sure that what we're doing is kept in check the whole time, right? Let's just make sure that as we go, we've got that understanding, we've got control, we've got visibility, so we can be very proactive with and conscientious as we pick up more and more tooling. Very famously in the industry, observability, there are 3 key pillars, which is metrics, traces, and logs. And really importantly, they have to be very, very tightly correlated. And then there's a few supporting tenets as well, and I'll dig into these in a bit more. So we've got full fidelity, real-time, scalable, and open source-based data ingest. Now, when it comes to those pillars, the way I like to think of them is, really a metric is a snapshot in time. What's happening? What is latency right now? What's our revenue? What's our error rate? Gives us an indication, snapshot in time value of what's happening. The traces that we get from our systems gives us that idea of where it's happening. Again, maybe we're dealing microservice-based environment. Who knows which one of the 100 services that we have in our environment were called throughout this transaction, which one was actually the problematic one, help us to figure out that piece of the puzzle. And then the logs come in to give us that low-level root cause analysis of what's actually gone wrong. Another way you can think of this, I'm a very visual person, even like your car, right? You've got a light that comes up on your dash, something's wrong. We don't know yet, it's just yellow. And then we can plug into the console. This at least gives us an idea of where it is. Hey, it's an electrical problem, right? So then when we do go hunting for those logs, I don't need to sift through every single event. I can be very laser focused with where I look and find that root cause issue. And then those supporting tenets. So what we believe with Splunk is that it needs to be full stack and full fidelity. And this is important because when we want to measure user experience, it's important to know what's actually happening server side that contributes to that user experience. And similarly, whatever we're doing server side, what does that mean for user experience? And to do that, digital is pretty critical at the moment, as I'm sure you're all aware, and because of the pandemic, that's only exacerbated the issue as well. So to remain competitive, when a second matters, and I'll go over some business metrics in a moment, when a second matters, any chance of being proactive means it's got to be in real time. So we're talking stream-based real-time analytics. And then when it comes to analytics, really important there that with the sheer volume of data that we've got coming through, we want our observability solution to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting for us. Don't show me 4 million traces to sift through. Show me the ones that are relevant to the thing I'm looking at. Which ones are actually indicative of this performance issue that we're seeing, right? Give me some more contextualized information. And also, no one knows our business like ourselves, right? So I've got specific questions tailored to my business that I want to ask of the data. It should be flexible enough to let me ask those questions rather than ring fencing me into a particular subset of questions out of the box. It needs to be enterprise grade in scale. So as I grow and as I scale out, I shouldn't have to worry about having to bring this thing along with me for the ride. It should just grow organically with me as I need it to. And then lastly, we're a big believer in using open standards for data ingest, both in terms of preventing a vendor lock-in from your ingestion pipeline, so that's a future long-term investment, but also just even keeping up to date with the ever-evolving technologies, right? Something new is coming out every other day. No one vendor, let's be honest, no one vendor can stay on top of it all, and that's where we really need to leverage the community to stay up to date, and that's a big task. So when it comes to leveraging the community, there was about 27 different projects trying to tackle this problem at one stage. The two biggest ones there was open census and open tracing. Now, very proudly, Splunk is one of the co-founders of this initiative. We helped to co-found OpenTelemetry. We merged those two biggest ones, and this has now very quickly become the industry standard of how we collect telemetry data. You can imagine with 27 different projects, basically what we had was a lot of the same things being repeated over and over and over again. We really didn't get much depth, right? There was a lot of breadth, but not a lot of depth. So now that we've got OpenTelemetry, it gives us a consolidated effort to tackling a lot of these problems we get with capturing telemetry data from our model applications. Really what it gives us is a single set of APIs, libraries, agents, binaries to tackle this problem. And what does this look like, or what are some of the components? Importantly, there's APIs, SDKs. For me, I've worked in data for a long time. Something like conventions might seem easy to gloss over, but I can tell you right now, even just tackling CPU utilization across Kubernetes, cloud platforms, Linux, Windows, not trying to normalize OS metrics, I guarantee you that's a lot of engineering effort and a lot of consultancy time. I worked for a consultancy. A lot of time goes into just normalizing data. So having that done for you across all these new technologies and having a standard there that everyone has to adhere to moving forward is a big game changer and a lot of the heavy lifting done for you. And then, of course, we've got the collector, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second, which is really the binary that sits front and center of how all of this works. And then the various client libraries to make sure that we can instrument everything on the back end. There's support there for metrics, traces, and logs, as well as browser and mobile-based applications. So that collector, as I mentioned, sits front and center. And that can be on a host. It can be on a Kubernetes cluster. Whatever OpenTelemetry agents we're using to instrument your application will send through the telemetry that's captured to the OpenTelemetry collector. That keeps the agent as lightweight as possible. The collector can do a lot of that enrichment and handle the transmission of data as well. It can sit there, interface with Kube APIs, gather all the information coming out of your Kubernetes clusters. We can scrape Prometheus exporters. We can use it as an endpoint to spray data to. And importantly, it will handle where we send the data to. So really any combination of these receivers, processors, and exporters, however we want to get the data, whatever we want to do to it, and all the places we want to send it to, we can put them in any combination. I touched on there that digital is critical at the moment, and there's some staggering stats. So BBC found that a second slower page load time meant 10% user abandonment for their checkouts. Walmart found that 100 milliseconds improvement to their page load time raised revenue by 1%. Now, when your annual revenue is 600 billion, 1% becomes a lot of money. Vodafone found that addressing their LCP, which is largest contentful paint, it's a Google Core Web Vital, found that addressing that by 31% increased sales by 8%, and Google find that generally meeting their Core Web Vitals by 24%. Sorry, meeting all their Core Web Vitals fixes up user abandonment by 24% as well. So really important, especially after the pandemic, right? We see the digital landscape now is more critical than ever. And it's not just outward-facing metrics as well. Again, when we think about what it's helping us with internally, release quality, velocity, being able to produce more revenue-generating streams quicker, being able to really optimize and focus in and prioritize our customer experience, the system availability and uptime, and even just developer efficiency, right? Being able to shift left, being able to adopt new tools, technologies, doing that in a much more reliable way, and addressing problems much earlier on in the development lifecycle. Then as we start to mature out observability, and this is for me where things really start to get interesting, then we can start to focus on some of the business metrics that we start to unlock, right? And then again, when we use OpenTelemetry, we can, through tagging and using more metadata intelligently, we can then drive more questions, more angles, more use cases. That's really where we start to hit a lot of these business metrics. Getting an understanding of what we're doing in that engineering environment and how that correlates to business is going to be really key in staying competitive, staying profitable, and then being more innovative. So being able to look at what is, as a result of this sprint, iteration, feature, thing that we've built, what is the increase in revenue? Or what is our production efficiency? How many more widgets can we produce as a result? What is the cost of, rather than assuming what the cost of an impact is, what is the actual quantified, tangible cost of that impact? We can measure it. Being able to look at things like cost of service, if we're running a bunch of APIs, maybe we're using a lot of serverless functions, what is the actual cost of that we're seeing, or on the bottom line? And then being able to really look at any of these metrics by any sort of dimension that helps our business use cases. So maybe we want to look at it by customer, by SLA tier, by region, really whatever helps us to focus in on supporting our own business outcomes and goals. Not only that, it helps us to also validate a lot of the assumptions we've made along the way. So is our understanding of user experience actually translating to KPIs? For example, we saw some of those stats around BBC and Vodafone. Is it the same for us? What does it mean for us? What do we get out of investing in X amount of dollars? What is that likely to return? What is the actual criticality of the systems? Maybe we've put too much priority on a particular system, but in actual fact, another system is a better target to optimize. There's lower hanging fruit, and we're going to get much more returns on targeting another system first. And then again, bottom line, right? At the end of the year, how much have we spent on engineering efforts versus what have we gained? How much have we improved our capacity to generate revenue? So how do we start to hit the ground running with observability? Well, at least from me, I would say make sure that you start early and let your observability solution mature alongside your application. When we say that, you can imagine over the course of a few years, you've had questions asked from the business, from the engineering teams, a whole bunch of new use cases, and you've addressed those, right, over the course of how many years. Now, trying to retrofit a lot of these questions and use cases and answers into an observability solution after the fact then comes with a lot of, I guess, technical debt. When you can let these things occur side by side, it's going to be a much more organic growth. And not only that, it's also going to help you to get to that more mature state earlier, right, and much more reliably as we go. Make sure we do fit observability into all stages of that development loop. There's a lot of information there to gain in terms of how we're doing, how to optimize, and how to be more efficient with our day-to-day. And then, again, can't stress enough to use open standards, in this case, OpenTelemetry, for your data ingest. And again, to give you an idea, like I said, it's a vendor-agnostic way of capturing your data. We strongly believe that the value that you get when it comes to an observability solution should be from the insights that the platform gives you, not because you've been baked into $5 million worth of technical debt. So a big believer in that, and everyone should be, hopefully, now looking at actually providing insights and value, and it should just be a config change away to switch out a provider. That's it from me. Thank you very much. So we've got the booth also right near the coffee cart. Please come ask any questions. Come get a t-shirt. I've got ones that match what I'm wearing today. So come and say good day. And thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.